Everyone, in this video, let's learn about Agile Story Points. We will see what are story points, why to use story points, how to estimate using story points, and how to minimize sprint variance. The concept of sprint variance is an extension which we can say when we learn about story points, and it will be good to know more and understand how do we control it. Let's dive in. Before we discuss and know more about story points, and for that matter any agile refresher or a training session, it will be good to revisit the agile caveat. What it says: agile is a framework and not a set of rigid rules. The success of agile implementation depends on adapting the agile principles, like the one what we are learning now of story points, adapting these agile principles to fit our unique, specific team dynamics, the goals the team is pursuing, and the products we are building. So the key things to note here is that agile is just a framework. We need to adapt those agile principles to our specific team needs. There is no single right way in agile. One work can be done in multiple ways to get the same outcome or deliver value. Context is key. What is working for one high-performing team might not work for another team. Understanding the team dynamics and the environment in which the team operates is of importance. Thirdly, continuous improvement. What is working now might not work in the future for the same team. So as the team progresses learning agile, it matures. There is new information which is available. So we need to understand all of those factors and then continuously evolve, revisit, and improve our process. And finally, balancing agile with organizational realities. The teams which we work in would be part of a group of teams or a program. A group of such programs might be a part of a department or an org. And at all these levels, there are different governance practices which will be in play. They will be operating under different constraints. So understanding these limitations, we need to implement our agile practices. So this is about the agile caveat, a good to know thing before we deep dive. Let's get started with story points. What are story points? Story pointing is a relative estimation technique which is used in agile, and it gives the overall size, which includes not just effort, but effort, complexity, unknowns, and dependencies of a user story. There are some absolute estimation techniques like estimating hours, what used in waterfall. Here the keyword is a relative estimation. We relatively estimate the current work comparing it to the previous other reference estimates when we have. The raw values are of not much importance. What matters are the relative values. And when we estimate in story points, we assign them a point value, which is a unitless point value. We take it from modified Fibonacci series, which is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. When we estimate, we pick any of these numbers as per the size what the team thinks would be fit for it, and we give that point value. A story which is assigned 3 should be 3 times bigger than the story which is assigned 1. And also the story 3 would be bigger than a story which is estimated as 2 and smaller than the story which is estimated as 5. So this relativity is of importance when we are estimating with story points. And when we are starting a project or estimating first time with a team, we need to have a reference story points. How can we do this? Take any small piece of work which the team can deliver. This includes development, review, testing, and deployment. And come up with a consensus alignment among a team. What could be that story point value? Sometimes it can be 3, sometimes it can be 1, and give a number to it. That would be your first reference story point. And similarly, take one more story. And now, since you already have one reference story point, compare this new story with the previous one. Is it bigger than that? Is it smaller than that? Or is it the effort, complexity, unknowns, dependence, everything is similar? If it is same, give the same number. If it is bigger, give a bigger number. And now, by doing that, you will have 2 reference story points. And the subsequent story points can be relatively estimated based on these initial 2 story points what you have. And sometimes in few orgs, they will standardize this practice, which means if there are a group of teams, it is recommended to have a same reference story points across teams. And in that case, one of the common recommendation, and even this recommendation is what SAFe Scaled Agile framework gives, is to have one story point approximated to 1 day of time box. It's not just 1 day of effort, but 1 day of time box, which includes effort, complexity, unknowns, and dependencies. Let's move on. When we are estimating in story points, we need to have a good enough estimation mindset. And estimation, as the name itself says, it is just an estimate and it is never perfect. It is just a directional forecast which we will get by estimating rather than precision. And it will help us only to plan and to know how much work we need to deliver by what time and at what milestones. To do that planning, estimation will help. It is not a written in stone, like a kind of a contract. It keeps changing. And when we are estimating, we are only discussing the assumptions. We don't know that all of those things are right and these things will happen at those times at the start of the project itself. So only on those assumptions, we will come up with estimates. Here, the importance is of shared understanding. So everyone should have the same assumptions and everyone should align with the scope, what we are planning to do, the approach, and then come up with estimate. This is about the good enough estimation mindset which we need to have when we are estimating with story points. And a caution note here is, do not over-engineer story points. Story points are meant to be simple. It should help the developers rather than hinder them by overcomplicating with a lot of calculations and so on. Here I have put one note which will be good to see at the end of this session. Let's revisit that later. Moving on to why to use story points. Here are some of the advantages. Story points are easy and quick compared to previously, the estimation which we used is the absolute estimation in hours. Compared to that, this is very easy and quick. In a short refinement session of half an hour to 1 hour, we can estimate multiple story points, multiple stories. This encourages collaboration where team collectively estimates. Everyone together discusses, aligns, and comes up with the story points. Here we include not just the effort, but also complexity, risks, dependencies, unknowns. The story points which we come up with are unique and exclusive to each team. A relative estimation is much simpler and effective than absolute estimation. As humans, we have a tendency or a psychology where humans are good at comparing. Like take two stories and we can tell whether it is big or small compared to the other story. The relative estimation by nature itself is much simpler for humans. And over a period of time in the past, we have seen that relative estimated stories with story points are much more closer to actuals than what we have planned in the long run planning, which means when we see the absolute estimation techniques, the estimates which have come from that, most of the time they go offset. by either 10% of the schedule or 50% of the schedule or sometimes even 100% and beyond of the schedule. But with agile story pointing, most of the times what we had the actual duration is almost closer to what we had planned initially. This is for the releases and different launches what we had. This is about the advantages of why we use story points. How to estimate in story points? To estimate in story points, we use a technique called as planning poker. Here I have given a tool which is a free tool which anyone can use to estimate story points for your teams. It's a very user-friendly tool. I have been using it for the past most of the time. How do we estimate? So initially, in any of the refinement session, the product owner will have his priorities defined. He will know what as a team we are planning to do. And he picks up the top priority stories. He picks up one story and reads it out. He presents the story to his team. And after that, the team will ask clarifying questions on the scope. And once that discussion is done, Scrum Master will ask the team to estimate. He will ask them to estimate the stories with respect to the different story points and reference story points what we had. And when that is done, team may come up with different numbers. Some may say 5, some may say 3, some may say 8. Then the Scrum Master would call out the people who are maybe giving more and giving less. And then he will ask them to let everyone know why they think so. Here it may happen the person who is estimating 8 might have considered more of the scope aspects or something which other people are missing. And the person who estimated as 3 might know a faster way to do things. It can be any way. And then once this discussion happens of everyone, then we can have one more round of estimation with this new understanding. And mostly in the second round, everyone will be having a consensus and we can finalize that as an estimate for this story. Sometimes it might happen there might be some 1 or 2 persons who will be sticking to their estimates and they don't want to change. So that's a different problem. That's a team dynamics problem or different problem. That's not an estimation problem. But in such cases, a simple way is go with the majority or go with the story point which is giving more number. That should be fine. And these things will be normalized over a period of time since we consider the velocity also of the team. Okay. And here there are few notes which I mentioned. Many times we have seen that story pointing will be given in absolutes. Like the teams will not have reference story points, and when a product manager presents a story, each team member will give their own estimate, an absolute number. But it is good to have a reference, and if they're giving 5, why is it 5? Is it bigger than the previous story which is estimated as 3 as a reference? Or is it smaller? So that kind of relativity should be there. So have these reference stories always handy when we are estimating in story points. And secondly, revisit the story points. In case if the refinement session has happened, also revisit these numbers once during the planning. There might be something new which is known. And sometimes it may happen that you're estimating the story point for the entire release or the entire quarter. So during that time, occasionally revisit these. So it is not that once you have estimated and it is done. So it's a continuous process. Whenever required, you can revisit the estimates. This is how you estimate in story points. Hope this is clear. Let's move on to the last topic. How to minimize sprint variance. Before that, let's understand what is sprint variance. Sprint variance is the difference between committed and completed story points. This is how many stories you commit at the start of the sprint versus how many you complete or deliver towards the end of the sprint. And this sprint variance should be minimum. Ideally, it should be 0. Everything what you plan team should be able to deliver it. But sometimes there might be some spillover, there might be some carry forwards occasionally, which need to be on a case by case basis. And let's see how can we achieve this minimum sprint variance. And there should be it will be good if you can have a target of 10 to 20% of story sprint variance, which is okay. If it is more than that, you need to revisit or know some of these practices so that you can control that. How can we do that? At the start of the sprint, these are the few steps you need to follow. At the start of the sprint, calculate the team capacity. There might be some leaves, few team members might be some supporting some multiple teams. There might be holidays. Calculate all that and check what is your capacity of the team. And when you start the sprint, commit the stories only as per the capacity or below it. If your team's capacity is 30 story points, commit only 30 or lesser than that. And also use previous sprints velocity as one of the reference. Though the capacity says 30, but over a period of last 3 sprints, we see that the team was able to deliver only 25 story points. So use that also one reference story point. So in that case, you no need to go till 30 story points. You can go till maybe 20, 25, or even slightly above than that. So use that also as one of the reference. And to do all this, there are 2 prerequisites. One is stories should be available for all the team members at the start of the sprint. Most of the time, stories are not available. Stories will be written sometimes mid-sprint, and once you start, stories will be just kind of written like drafts, and then they will be maturing. We need to avoid that. We need to have stories at the start of the sprint itself, and it is good practice to have stories at least for 2 sprints in the future. That's the healthy backlog. A deep backlog which contains stories for the next 2 sprints. That's a good practice to follow. Coming to mid-sprint. In mid-sprint, avoid new stories. Sometimes it happens that teams keep on adding the stories. We need to avoid that. And suppose if it is a nature of the team that this kind of work is inevitable, for example, like it is a production team where you get production requests in between also, and since it's a production issue, you need to take it up on priority, or you will be working with some dependencies for other teams which are of critical nature. So in such cases, if you know this beforehand, have a percentage of it factored at the start itself. In case if your team capacity is 30%, go with only maybe 25 story points or 20 story points, a certain percentage at the start of the sprint only. You keep it so that you will know that this is the work which will keep coming, and you can have a full capacity by then. Towards the end of sprint, avoid spillovers. In case if there are spillovers, which will happen sometimes, have some justification for it, why we could not complete as we have planned. And practice story slicing. So this has to be done in alignment with the PO and the tech lead. In case if there is some part of work which is done and some which is not done, slice the story vertically. So and create a new story for the part of work which is unfinished, so that you can deliver the work, deliver some value of the finished work, and the remaining part you can take it up in the next sprint. But this should not become a kind of a regular practice for all the stories we should not do. So just align with the PO and tech lead and then practice this. One prerequisite here to having a healthy end of sprint is do not push all the stories to testing or UAT on the last day of the sprint. Most of the time this happens where all the work happens in the last few days and stories will be pushed just one day before closing the sprint. So this does not allow enough time for the product owner to validate all the stories thoroughly. Hope this is clear. What is sprint variance and how can we minimize it? At the start of the sprint, few things to do, mid-sprint taking care, and end of sprint, what are the practices we can follow? Now let's check the previous slide, which we said we will do it later. Hope you can see this. This is Ron Jeffries saying. He's the inventor of story points, and he says that I like to say that I may have invented story points, and if I did, I am sorry now. If they're not providing great value, I'd advise dropping them. But if on the other hand, you just love them, well, carry on. This is what he said, because the current nature of how these story points, everyone has made it so complicated that it is not giving the right value. So the intention of story points here is to keep it simple. Do not overcomplicate it. Use it as per your context, how it is working well for your team. Use it that way. These are the few key takeaways. Hope you like this session and it's of help. Thank you for watching.